Moving to a new city can be both exciting and isolating. For me, at 34, it was a chance to start fresh, though the loneliness sometimes crept in. Work was steady, though uninspiring, and my days had started to blur into a routine I wasn't proud of. Nights, however, were different. For the past 2 months, I'd been going out almost every evening, meeting new people, exploring the city, and trying to find a rhythm that suited me. That's how I met her at a party one night. She was magnetic in a way I couldn't quite put into words. Our conversation flowed effortlessly, and there was an instant spark. We kissed before the night ended, exchanged contacts, and promised to keep in touch. The following week, our chats were easy and playful. She seemed curious about my new life in the city, but never probed too deeply. I felt comfortable being open with her, sharing bits and pieces of my recent adventures and the reasons behind my constant outings. She seemed fine with it, or at least that's what I thought. We agreed to meet again, this time at a bar. It felt casual, like an extension of our natural connection from that first night. Despite the challenges of adjusting to a new city and the uncertainty of whether this place would be home for long, meeting her felt like a bright spot. I walked into the bar that evening feeling optimistic. The vibe was warm, familiar, and inviting, just like our conversations had been. I arrived at the bar a little early, eager but not wanting to appear overly keen. It wasn't long before she walked in, and instantly the atmosphere felt lighter. Her presence was magnetic, just as it had been at the party. We greeted each other warmly, sharing a brief kiss that felt both casual and promising. The initial moments were easy. We ordered drinks and settled into a conversation that mirrored the flow of our week-long chats, light, engaging, and sprinkled with laughter. The setting was perfect. The hum of the bar's soft music, the clinking of glasses, and the gentle murmur of other patrons provided just the right backdrop. But as the minutes passed, the tone shifted slightly. She started steering the conversation in a direction I hadn't expected. "So," she began, leaning slightly forward, "you mentioned you've been going out a lot lately. Is that still the case?" I smiled, trying to keep the mood casual. "Yeah, for now. It's been a way to explore the city and meet people, you know? It's not really my usual thing, but I've been enjoying it." She nodded, but didn't drop the subject. "And the places you go, are they mostly bars, clubs?" Her questions were polite enough, but there was something about their precision that put me on edge. I answered honestly, explaining that I'd been mixing it up. Bars, restaurants, a few social events. It was clear she wanted to know more, though I couldn't quite figure out why. Her next question caught me off guard. "Do you use dating apps?" I hesitated for a moment before answering. "Yeah, I've used them a bit. Nothing serious has come from it, though." She responded with a small smile, adding almost as an afterthought, "That's how I met my ex." The statement hung in the air for a moment. It wasn't accusatory, but it didn't feel casual either. I shrugged it off and kept the conversation moving, but a seed of discomfort had been planted. As our conversation drifted, she started pressing a little harder, her questions growing more specific. "So, do you plan to keep going out every night for the next 2 months?" she asked, her tone measured but deliberate. I paused, sipping my drink to buy a moment. "I don't know," I replied honestly. "I'm just taking things as they come. It's been a way to make this city feel a little less new." She nodded, but her gaze lingered on me, as if dissecting my words. "What kind of people have you been meeting? Are they mostly casual acquaintances or potential partners?" I gave a short laugh, trying to diffuse the tension I was beginning to feel. "Mostly just people to hang out with. Nothing too serious." Her questions continued, each one edging closer to something I couldn't quite pin down. "Do you usually go alone? Or with friends? How often do you meet someone you feel a connection with? Have you ever brought anyone back to your place?" By now, I was starting to feel cornered. The casual, playful vibe from earlier had all but evaporated. I began to feel like I was being cross-examined, not simply having a conversation. I tried redirecting the subject, talking about the city, our shared experiences at work, anything to shift the focus. But each time I steered the topic away, she found a way to circle it back. "Honestly," I finally said, my voice tinged with frustration, "I didn't expect this level of curiosity about my social life." She blinked, tilting her head slightly. "I'm not judging," she replied. her tone neutral. "I'm just curious about who you are." But it didn't feel like curiosity. It felt like scrutiny. I smiled politely, but inside, I could feel my discomfort growing by the second. The ease and warmth of our earlier exchanges had all but vanished. I could feel the weight of her questions still lingering, like an unspoken accusation. I tried to maintain a calm demeanor, but inside, I was grappling with an unexpected sense of unease. Sensing my discomfort, she leaned back slightly and let the conversation drift to other topics, work, hobbies, the usual surface-level stuff. But something had shifted between us. Her questions had planted doubts in my mind, and I couldn't shake the feeling that the encounter had taken on a different tone. I responded politely, even laughed at her jokes, but my enthusiasm was fading. It wasn't just her questions, it was the way she seemed so intent on cataloging my answers. I started to wonder if she was looking for red flags or if this was her way of sizing me up. At one point, I tried to lighten the mood. "You know, I usually don't get interrogated on a first date," I said with a small chuckle. She smiled faintly, but there was no real warmth behind it. "I'm just trying to get to know you," she said. It should have felt reassuring, but it didn't. Instead, her words felt like a thin veil over a deeper intention I couldn't quite grasp. I found myself growing defensive, though I tried not to show it. The bar's lively atmosphere felt distant now, the hum of conversations and clinking glasses fading into the background. All I could focus on was how out of sync we seemed to be. The chemistry that had brought us together felt like it was slipping away, replaced by a growing tension neither of us could fully acknowledge. I stayed in the moment, but only barely. Part of me was already wondering if this date could be salvaged, or if it was better to cut it short. Despite the tension, she didn't seem ready to call it a night. Instead, she kept the conversation going, as though she were determined to shift the energy back to where it had been. She brought up travel stories, her favorite restaurants in the city, and even a funny anecdote about her job. I nodded along, responding when it felt natural, but my enthusiasm was waning. Every topic she introduced felt like a detour from the core discomfort that now sat between us. It wasn't that the conversation was unpleasant. On the surface, it was fine, but it all felt forced, as though she was trying to smooth over a wrinkle in a fabric that had already torn. At one point, she asked, "Do you think this city has grown on you yet?" I gave a half smile. "It has its charm," I replied, "but I'm not sure how long I'll stay. Work might take me elsewhere soon." Her response was immediate. "So, everything here is temporary for you?" It wasn't an accusation, but it wasn't neutral either. I could feel the weight of her question, like it was loaded with implications she wasn't fully voicing. I shifted in my seat, trying to stay polite. "I guess you could say that. I've always been open to change." She nodded, but her eyes lingered on mine, and the silence that followed felt heavy. I could sense she had more to say, but was holding back, and that restraint only added to the strain I was feeling. Still, she didn't suggest ending the date. Instead, she kept bringing up new topics, her voice calm but her words increasingly disconnected from any real emotion. The harder she tried to salvage the evening, the more I felt myself withdrawing, unsure why she was so insistent on continuing something that clearly wasn't working. By now, my patience was wearing thin. It wasn't anger exactly, just a growing realization that we were locked in a conversation neither of us really wanted to be in anymore. The rain outside had grown heavier, drumming steadily against the bar's windows. She glanced toward the door a few times, checking the downpour, but made no move to call an Uber. Instead, she leaned back into the conversation as if waiting for the rain to decide the night's course. I tried to focus, but my thoughts were scattered. The weight of the earlier tension still hung between us, and I couldn't help but notice how out of sync we were. Each new topic she introduced felt more like an attempt to fill the silence than a genuine desire to connect. "You're not in a rush to leave, are you?" she asked at one point, her tone light but probing. I shook my head, though part of me wanted to say otherwise. "Not necessarily," I replied, "but I'm not sure where this conversation is going." She looked surprised for a moment, then quickly recovered. "I just thought we could talk a little more while the rain lets up," she said, her voice steady. I nodded, though her response only added to my frustration. It wasn't about the rain or the time, It was about the growing sense that we were prolonging something that neither of us was fully invested in anymore. Her eyes flicked toward her phone briefly, but she didn't unlock it. "I'd call a ride, but I hate getting in and out of the car when it's pouring like this," she said casually, almost as if to herself. I leaned back in my chair, weighing my options. The rain wasn't going to stop anytime soon, and the thought of staying in this strained conversation for another half hour or more was becoming unbearable. The bar staff moved around us, cleaning tables and checking on other patrons, but even their presence felt distant. I found myself glancing toward the exit more often, wondering how much longer I could stay in this situation before it became impossible to ignore the growing irritation bubbling inside me. The rain showed no signs of letting up, and neither did the tension between us. I shifted uncomfortably in my seat, my patience thinning with each passing minute. She continued to chat, her tone calm, almost as if she were oblivious to the undercurrent of unease that had been brewing all evening. I tried to engage, answering her questions and responding to her remarks, but it felt like going through the motions. My thoughts were louder than the conversation now. Why was she dragging this out? Did she not see how off everything felt? The breaking point came when I glanced at the time. The evening had stretched far longer than I'd anticipated, and with every passing moment, the discomfort in my chest grew heavier. I knew this couldn't continue. She made another comment about waiting for the rain to ease, her gaze flicking once again toward her phone. "It's really coming down," she said almost absently. I took a deep breath, deciding that enough was enough. "Look," I started, keeping my tone neutral but firm, "I think I'm going to head out. It's been a long night." Her reaction was subtle, a slight lift of her eyebrows, a pause before she spoke. "You're leaving?" she asked, her voice measured. "Yeah," I replied, already reaching for my wallet. "I'll settle the bill before I go." I signaled the waiter, paid for our drinks, and stood up. She didn't protest or try to stop me, though her expression was unreadable. For a moment I wondered if I should wait for her to call an Uber, but something in me pushed against the idea. "I'll see you around," I said, offering a polite nod before heading for the door. As I stepped into the rain, I felt a mixture of relief and guilt. Part of me wondered if I should have handled it differently, but the other part was certain I'd made the right choice for my own peace of mind. The rain had slowed to a drizzle by the time I got home, but the weight of the evening hadn't lifted. As I kicked off my shoes and sank into the couch, my phone buzzed with a message. It was from her. "I can't believe you just left me there," it began. Her tone, though written, carried a sharpness that was unmistakable. She mentioned how the waitress had asked if she was okay after I left, and how awkward it felt to sit alone waiting for her Uber. "You didn't even check if I'd be fine getting home," she added. I read the message twice, feeling a familiar swirl of emotions, guilt, defensiveness, and the lingering frustration from earlier. I thought back to the night, how we had both felt the tension, how we'd gone in circles trying to salvage a conversation that had derailed hours ago. She wasn't drunk, I reminded myself. She'd spent most of the night scrolling on her phone, even mentioning the rain multiple times as a reason for not leaving. I had assumed, perhaps naively, that she was capable of managing herself. I started typing a reply, then stopped. What could I say that wouldn't escalate things? The truth was I had felt trapped in that bar. Her insistence on staying, despite the growing discomfort between us, had left me feeling like there was no graceful way out. But as I sat there, I couldn't ignore the small voice in my head, asking if I should have handled things differently. Could I have stayed a little longer? Waited until she called the Uber? Or was it fair to prioritize my own frustration and discomfort in that moment? Her message ended with a simple, cutting question. "Why did you have to leave like that?" I didn't have an easy answer, not for her and not for myself. Sitting there with her message still open on my phone, I couldn't help but replay the night in my head. I tried to piece together where things had gone wrong, what had shifted so suddenly from the easy connection we had shared earlier in the week. The questions she'd asked at the bar came back to me, specific, probing, and relentless. Were they really innocent curiosity, or was there something more behind them? I couldn't shake the feeling that they were meant to corner me, to fit me into some mold she had in mind. I wondered if she had picked up on my discomfort. Maybe she had noticed the subtle ways I tried to redirect the conversation, or the moments I grew quieter as the night wore on? Did she sense how I felt, and if so, why did she keep going? Then there was her decision to stay at the bar despite the growing tension. Part of me felt she might have been trying to smooth things over. Maybe she realized the questions had landed poorly and was attempting to backtrack. But instead of addressing the root of the discomfort, she had chosen to shift gears, leaving everything unresolved. And yet I couldn't ignore my own part in it. I had let my irritation show, even if I hadn't said it outright. Could I have communicated better? Would staying a little longer have made a difference, or would it have only prolonged the inevitable discomfort? The memory of her words lingered in my mind. "You didn't even check if I'd be fine." Was that fair? She wasn't stranded or unsafe. She had options just as I did. Still, I couldn't fully shake the guilt, the nagging thought that maybe, despite everything, I should have waited. I sat there, caught in a loop of self-justification and second-guessing, unsure if I had been right to leave or if I had let my frustration cloud my judgment. As I sit here now, replaying everything from that night, I can't help but wonder, was I wrong? Was I the one who let the situation spiral out of control? It's easy to justify my actions. I felt cornered by her questions that seemed less about curiosity and more about dissecting who I was. The night felt like a slow unraveling, with every attempt to salvage the mood only making things worse. I didn't want to stay in that bar a second longer than I had to, not for my own peace of mind at least. But then there's her perspective. Maybe she was genuinely trying to understand me, trying to get a clearer picture of who I was before deciding whether to invest more time in me. Maybe my decision to leave, abrupt as it was, felt to her like I was dismissing her entirely. And then there's the practical side of it. She wasn't drunk or stranded. She had her phone and could call an Uber at any time. But did I still owe her something more in that moment? Was it on me to wait until she felt ready to leave, even if the tension had made the evening unbearable for both of us? I keep coming back to her message, "Why did you have to leave like that?" It's a question I've been asking myself ever since. Could I have stayed a little longer? Could I have handled it differently? Or was I right to prioritize my own discomfort and leave a situation that had clearly gone sour? So now I'm asking you, am I the bad guy here? Did I act selfishly? Or was it fair to walk away when I did? What would you have done in my place?